Hey everybody, my name's Robyn Ivy. My dad was a Methodist minister from Texas. He died 10 years ago from a long bout with Alzheimer's. And about 2 months ago, I finally convinced my mom to let me have a box of his sermons. I really wanted to explore what his life was like as a pastor. I wanted to understand his faith and his journey of faith over 40 years of being a minister. And I wanted an opportunity to kind of get to know my dad a little bit better. I started to realize that I was doing a lot of things similar to my father, but I wasn't around that much when my dad was kind of in his prime of pastoring. I left home when I was 15 and I didn't return. I saw my parents and stuff, but I wasn't in his church weekly and wasn't around. And I was also a kid. So my experience of what my dad was like as a man, as a father, as a preacher, as a husband, and as a person of faith was something I was really curious about. So I've decided to start reading his sermons because I think they're really powerful. They really speak to me. They are usually crazy synchronistic. I'll also start by saying, although I'm an incredibly spiritual and faithful person, I don't necessarily consider myself Methodist. My dad was really religious, which I have an enormous amount of respect for. I consider myself faithful, but not particularly religious. Although in many ways, I think these sermons are really shifting some of that for me. So I thought today I would tell you a quick story, read the sermon, and then offer you some reflections about it. The first is my oldest son, his name is Rook. That's R-O-O-K. He came home from college on Monday, and I had seen him for 5 minutes, and we were standing outside of my car. He gave me a big hug in the driveway, and for some reason, I honestly can't even remember why, he told me that he recently had gone into a thrift store. He goes to school in Arizona, I'll say. And he was out there and went to a thrift store and spent like $4 on a news clipping article that he'd found about when African-American children were first allowed into public schools for the first time, and how it was really moving, and how he couldn't believe that, like, Jack Kerouac had written On the Road a few years before this child was allowed to attend public school, and like how crazy that was for him as a 19-year-old to consider, right? So hold that in the back of your mind. So then I go through my day. It's the end of the day. I either tend to grab a sermon from my dad at the end of the day or in the morning, and I just go into this box, swear to God, dig through, pick the one that I feel inclined, and read it. All right, so on Monday night, after greeting my son for the first time in months, I was going to sleep, and I chose this sermon. It is from Sunday, May 4th, 1997, and it is called Connected. A newspaper reporter went to interview a successful entrepreneur. "How'd you do it?" he asked. "How'd you make all this money?" "I'm glad you asked," the entrepreneur replied. "Actually, it's a rather wonderful story. You see, when my wife and I married, we started out with a roof over our heads, some food in our pantry, and 5 cents between us. I took that nickel, went down to the grocery store, bought an apple, and shined it up. Then I sold it for 10 cents. "What'd you do then?" the reporter asked. "Well," he said, "I bought 2 more apples, shined them up, and sold them for 20 cents. The reporter thought this would be a great human interest story. "Then what?" the reporter asked excitedly. "Then my father-in-law died and left us $20 million. The businessman laughed. That man prospered, not because of his own ingenuity, but because he was connected. Connected. A word to think about for a minute. It means power. All of us have heard someone or other say, 'I have connections,' and it meant I have access to power, wealth, and I can get it done." There's a humorous story about another successful businessman who was invited to deliver the commencement address at a school. He elected to speak on the subject, how to succeed. As he entered the door leading to the auditorium stage, he noticed the word push printed on bold letters on the outside. He thought it would be a good theme for his speech. Push. When he hit the high point of his speech, he said, "I can sum up my message in one word." And he pointed to the door. And the students started laughing. Puzzled, the speaker looked at the door. Printed on the inside was not the word push, but the word pull. That's how many people succeed, not because of their push, but because of their pull, because they are connected to someone who's powerful. How often have we said it's not what you know, but who you know? Julius Little of Greenville, North Carolina, was hospitalized for congestive heart failure. The doctor warned him his recovery would be slow. His daughter told him not to worry. "Everyone in my church is praying for you," she said. Still, he was fearful. In a matter of days, though, he began to rally. In fact, in practically no time he felt like himself again. Sorry, I'm not a professional read it out loud kind of human. Even his doctor was amazed at the progress and saw no reason why Julius and his wife, LaRue, couldn't go through with their plans to visit Opryland in Nashville. Okay, I just have to stop because I really also think my dad totally made up this name. I just cannot believe that, he really read a thing about somebody named Julius and his wife, LaRue. These are the things I think of. I'm like, this is where the daughter in me comes up, and I'm like, really, Dad? I don't think anybody's buying that this was actually about a dude named Julius and his wife, LaRue. But my dad used to have these volumes of stories that came, I imagine, from seminary or somewhere. He had these vaults of stories, these things that he would pull from. And I swear, I think sometimes he would just change the name into some weird Texas names. For example, he was going to name me, I'm not kidding, Mignon. Right, little beef? No, I'm a vegetarian. I'm just saying. Those are some funny parts of my dad. Here we go. So, Julius and LaRue couldn't go through with their plans to visit Opryland in Nashville, Tennessee. It was hot and crowded in the theme park. So LaRue rested on a shady bench while Julius went to find a cold drink. Now LaRue struck up a conversation with two friendly ladies sitting beside her on the bench. They couldn't believe it when she told them she and her husband were on their way to Blue Springs, Montana to visit their daughter. "Why, I'm from Blue Springs," said one of the women. "What's your daughter's name?" Julius walked up just as this friendly woman said that she was a member of Judy's prayer chain. Then she exclaimed to Julius, "I've been praying for you. I thought you were really sick. What in the world are you doing standing here?" "I'm standing here," Julius said, "because of you." He was convinced he was standing there because he was connected to the ultimate source of power and healing. When we are connected, we have power. To be connected also means that we have a presence. Consider the alleged Unabomber, an obviously very intelligent man who reportedly committed bizarre and cruel acts. I don't think anymore that he's a alleged Unabomber, but this was from 1997, so anyway. Consider the alleged Unabomber, an obviously very intelligent man who reportedly committed bizarre and cruel acts. Could it be that part of his problem was that he cut himself off from family, colleagues, and friends? Certainly there's something about isolation that affects the human spirit, whether that isolation is chosen or whether it's caused by circumstances beyond our control. Many of us have had the experience of being cut off from someone we love by death or possibly divorce or other reasons. There's probably no more devastating experience in life. The loneliness and the sense of isolation can be overwhelming. Now, all kinds of experiences can cause us to feel disconnected. Sometimes it's even having your children grow up and leave home. I understand that there's a luncheon group of older mothers in New York City who call themselves the "It Wouldn't Hurt You to Call Me Once in a While" club. Paul Turnier tells a story about a lonely lady he once knew who turned on her radio every night just to hear an announcer with a friendly voice say, "We bid you a very good evening." She evidently felt the announcer was the only person who cared about her. There's a program at the University of Florida in which veterinary students staff a hotline to help grieving pet owners cope with the death of their much-loved animal friends. The students receive specialized training to learn how to counsel and assist callers experiencing painful emotions. There's a tremendous need for such a service, says the faculty member who spearheaded the project. Growing numbers of single and elderly people rely on pets for companionship, feeling the death of a pet almost as strongly as that of a family member or friend. Isolation is a terrible way to live. Tim Kimmel, in his book Little House on the Freeway, tells us about his mother who died from cancer. From the time the doctors discovered it to the time it took her life was about 5 months. Her decline was swift and unstoppable. Surgery, radiation, chemotherapy had no effect, and it was difficult for the family to watch her die. Now, Tim and his younger brother flew 2,000 miles to see her 3 times in those 5 months that she was ill. During the last month, Tim called every morning to see how she made it through the night, and every night to see how she made it through the day. Tim's father stayed with his beloved wife every day, and his 3 brothers and sisters all lived in the area. They stopped by regularly, almost daily, to be with her. Shortly before Tim's mother died, a wealthy, influential member of that small community was admitted to the intensive care unit for observation. On the third night of his stay in the hospital, he had a discussion with the nurse who was preparing him to go to sleep for the night. Now, Tim called the unit shortly after she finished working with this wealthy gentleman, and this nurse couldn't help but relate their conversation to Tim. You see, the young nurse was a committed Christian, and she knew of Tim's family's love for Christ and of his mother's quiet but compelling testimony. She told him that the man she talked with was one of the most powerful men in the community, who wielded great influence even at the hospital. Yet he had lain in that hospital room for 3 days without a single visitor. He had a wife and children, but they had not come by. As she was giving him his medicine, he inquired of the patient in the next cubicle. "Oh, that's Mrs. Kimmel," the nurse replied. And she told him all about the family and mentioned that her two sons from out of town had flown back and forth to see her several times and called daily to check on her status. He then asked about Tim's mom's condition. "Mrs. Kimmel will die any day," the nurse told him. "If she lives a week, we will all be surprised." This was definitely before HIPAA policy, people. At that point, the man of influence dropped his head back on his pillow and got very quiet. Just before she walked away, he looked up with her with tears in his eyes and he said, "You know, I would gladly trade places with Mrs. Kimmel and die a week from now, if for that week I could have a spouse and children who care enough about me to not have me die alone." We all have a need to be connected, to know that there are people who care about us. We need to know that we're not alone. Of course, this is where our faith comes in a powerful way. It tells us we're not alone. We're never alone, no matter how isolated our situation seems. Columnist Sheila Graham had a compelling interview with Ruby Bridges Hall sometimes back. Ruby looked like a typical first grader with a big bow in her hair and lunchbox in her hand. She climbed the steps of the elementary school for the first day of school, but little else was typical about that day in November of 1960. Though she wasn't aware of it, Ruby had been chosen to be the first African American child to integrate this particular New Orleans grade school. Every day on her way to school, escorted by armed federal marshals, she braved angry whites shouting at her as she entered an empty classroom. White parents had moved their children to other schools. Ruby didn't realize until later, when a little boy told her why he couldn't play with her, that she was the reason for all the commotion. In her interview, Sheila Graham noted that even in this stressful situation of having mobs scream at her, little Ruby prayed every day, before and after school, for those who were verbally abusing her. Now, Ruby explained it this way: "One thing my mother always said to me was that when she couldn't be with me, if I was ever afraid, I should say my prayers." That's where they came from, and it sort of stuck with me. Ruby's mother wanted her to know that no matter the situation, she was never alone. She was connected. To be connected is to have power. It's to have an eternal presence in your life. It's to know someone cares about you. And one more thing, to be connected is to live a productive life. The reason many people fail to achieve great things with their lives is that they lack focus, a driving sense of purpose. Like Willie Loman in Arthur Miller's play, they live their lives not really knowing who they are, and so they fail to make their mark on the world. If only they could be connected to one who could give them a sense of purpose, a sense of mission, a sense of place in the world. And of course, that is the good news for the day. We can be connected to one who can give us power, one who can give us the presence, one who can help us live productive lives. Here it is, the great secret of life, the secret of having real pull in the things that matter most. It's to be connected to the one who is the ultimate source of power, to the one who will never forsake us, to the one who will help us live productive, meaningful lives. Christ says to us, "I have the strength to provide all your needs. I have the strength to hold you in the time of testing. I will never let you go." When we are joined to him, we have a source of power, presence, and purpose. We live productive lives. We are joined to him, we can truly say, "I've made it. I've got clout. I've got a friend in high places." So the reason I thought this was so powerful, number one, I thought it was amazing that it was called Connected. I also literally had to stop myself in awe that my father referred to the exact same message that my son had told me about earlier in the same day. It's like my son and my father who had passed a decade sooner came to tell me the same story, which I thought that was not lost on me, and I hope it's not lost on you. What I take away from these stories that my dad has offered, even on the parts where the dogma is a little different than my own, or the language is a little different, or the timing from, social circumstances. Right now, we're in the midst of this pandemic, and I think the words my father offered to his people in 1997 may not be that different than the words I'd like to offer you today, which is really staying connected to one another first, to God second, or maybe in reverse. I don't know. It's not for me to tell you what to do, but for me, recognizing that connection is the thing that keeps us thriving, that keeps us moving forward, that keeps us offering ourselves presence and opening up to the presence of God, that matters, right? When we're not connected with one another, when we're not open to a bigger presence, when we're not open to our faith in some capacity, when we don't manage our isolation, then we end up in those isolated places telling ourselves really crazy stories that usually don't serve us, that take us down, that promote our saboteurs instead of really promoting a deeper sense of connection, of love, of community, of hope. I'm sure that Ruby Bridges had to endure a lot before she could feel really connected and seen and understood and not isolated. But I think her path and her practice of praying, of surrendering to something higher, of having the trust, believing what her mom said, I think that's our responsibility right now. So I hope the sermon helped. I hope if you have questions or thoughts, please feel free to comment below. My goal with these is to really just share his message, to share my own reflections as they resonate with me. I often laugh and talk to my father as I read his sermons because as his child, I can hear the human in him. I can hear my father in him, the man behind the preacher coming up with silly names or his own connections to power, right? For me, power isn't really, it's not just about influence and money and all of those things. To me, power is really staying connected to a higher power first and foremost, and then living a life of agency to do the same and to live generously, faith over fear. That's what I have for you today. I hope it lands, I hope it helps, and I hope you have a really beautiful day.